Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
I've got Jennifer Eisenhardt with me today, and she's a documentary film producer who's had an amazing experience, like a lot of us, with LCHF, and then has gone on to decide that she wanted to make a movie about this whole situation, this problem. And she's managed to get some really amazing authorities on this whole lifestyle into this movie, but has a real focus on the patient side and the solution to the problem. So Jennifer, welcome, and tell us a bit about why you started, or why you decided to do this movie, and when you think it's going to be coming out.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. First of all, Doug, it's been great to get to know you, and appreciate your involvement as well. And thanks for having me on your podcast. For me, it was a personal experience that kind of launched this inquiry. I've been a journalist. I've worked in news and television news and done special projects and documentaries kind of my whole career. But it was about 2 years ago that I decided to take a sugar detox class. It's called the Restart program. It's a really great 5-week program that helps you detox off of sugar, because I always knew that I had a problem with sugar. It affected me poorly, and I just wanted to learn more about nutrition. And so I went into this course, and on the first class, the nutritional therapist said, not only do you need to cut out sugar, but you need to be eating a lot more fat, including saturated fat. And that just really shocked me. I was surprised to hear that I should be eating saturated fat, because I grew up in the low-fat era, had it, hammered into my head that saturated fat is bad, is going to give you a heart attack, and is a very dangerous thing to be eating. And so I kind of launched my own personal inquiry, like, okay, I need to go out and make sure this is right, that this nutrition class is actually giving me the correct information. And so being a journalist, I just kind of started doing my own investigation, and started reading quite a bit about the U.S. dietary guidelines and the low-fat diet. Stumbled into Nina Teicholz' book, Gary Taubes' books, and at the same time, throughout the course of this nutrition therapy class, I was feeling the changes in my own body of cutting out sugar and increasing fat, eating a lot more fat. So I was getting, verification from the research I was doing. I was also getting personal verification from how it was making me feel to cut out sugar and grains and eat a lot more fat. And so then at that time, I'm like, well, this is really interesting. We've been told all these years that fat is terrible. And it's been our nation's nutrition policy for all these years to cut out fat. And so I just thought it would be a fascinating topic for a film. And so that's what kind of started it all.
Yeah, but I mean, you've been doing this on your own dime, right? I mean, you've got these other projects that people pay you to do, but this one you're doing yourself.
Yeah.
So that's really commendable. Tell us a bit about the different folks that you've got featuring in your movie.
Oh yeah, that's what's so exciting, is that we've had the opportunity to interview just some of the brightest minds in this high-fat, low-carb world for the film. And folks like Jason Fung and Sarah Hallberg, Zoe Harcombe and Bret Scher, Johnny Bowden, Nina Teicholz and Gary Taubes, Professor Tim Noakes also. It was an interview of ours, yes, and you, which was wonderful to get a chance to meet you in person and interview with you as well and hear your story. Rob Lustig from UCSF, Eric Westman. I mean, these are just some of the brightest minds in this world right now of high fat, low carb. And so it's just been fascinating, a fascinating journey to meet these people and actually to go through all the interviews and weave together these stories of not only the experts talking to us about, for example, the difference between calories in, calories out versus the insulin model of weight gain, and just having that explained in such a clear way that it's like, that makes total sense, of course. Right. And but then additionally, we are interviewing a lot of real people and following personal patient stories. And I know one of your friends, the physician in San Diego, Dr. Brian Lenzkes, spent some time with us. Excuse me. And we interviewed 5 of his patients. It's just a fascinating story to hear how it affected people's lives to switch. People have been told all their lives that they should be eating carbohydrates, constantly consuming consistent amounts of carbohydrate. And I'm talking primarily about type 2 diabetics here. But then when they switch to cutting out the sugar, cutting out the grains, cutting out the carbs, that their disease resolves sometimes in a matter of days. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
But to hear these personal stories of people whose lives have been affected in such a positive way, I think is going to be a neat thing about the film.
Yeah, I've heard Brian talking a lot about that filming experience. I mean, we were in Australia at the time when you guys came out to San Diego to do the filming. Uh-huh. But he talks about it often, about how emotional it was for him to be able to sit there and hear his patients talking about how basically this saved their lives, and how, just the fact that he decided that it was time to be able to start telling his patients about what he had actually done for himself. That's how he did it. I mean, he tried it surreptitiously on his own because he was getting sick and fat, following his own advice that he was giving to his patients.
Right.
Came to our event in 2017, saw all these people like Gary Taubes and Steve Finney and those people speaking, and said like, hey, this is legit,
Yeah.
So when his patients asked him, what are you doing? How come you're losing all this weight? He then told them. And some of them decided that they would try and follow what he's doing. And I mean, in 2 years, he's taken 11 patients off insulin. He started this whole podcast with Dr. Tro which is going gangbusters now. He's turned into quite a celebrity himself. So it's super cool to kind of be the proud father there and feel like I had a bit of a hand in that. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
then
it was a neat experience to meet his patients. I mean, they were incredibly grateful. That's an amazing thing, to be able to impact someone's life that way, that positively, with such a simple thing.
Right. And then I mean, I really heard about the fact that you'd been in San Diego filming when I got back here, and I got hold of you and told you about our initiative with the standard of care and the clinical guidelines and stuff. Yeah. And in the end, managed to get out there to Boise to do some filming with you so that we could get that information into the movie as well, because I feel like that's another really massively positive step forward in terms of trying to get this adopted eventually as at least an alternative standard to the current one. For those people who don't eat carbs, whose metabolism is now different, a different standard applies to them, and now we have real tangible guidelines that have been overseen by a panel of advisors from around the world. Yeah. And now doctors have a real life document that they can work with and refer to.
Well, as you know, I think that's a big part of the reticence from mainstream medical to adopt low carb, high fat, is that there haven't been guidelines.
Right.
The dietary guidelines have not offered guidelines. Our government hasn't offered guidelines. And the American Diabetes Association has said for years, just until this year, that that diets with less than 130 grams of carbohydrate a day are unsafe. So for you to put together those clinical guidelines, we interview a dietitian local in my hometown who was just thrilled that those clinical guidelines came out. She works in a major medical system that isn't entirely on board. They do let her practice low carb, which is really cool that they're open-minded to that, but they're definitely not all on board with high-fat, low carb. And when the clinical guidelines came out on LowCarbUSA, for her it was a gift. I mean, she felt like something had her back now, and she was able to share those guidelines with physicians that refer to her, with her superiors, and she feels safe for the first time in her career this year. I mean, because of the clinical guidelines on LowCarbUSA, and also because of the ADA issuing their review paper that low carb can be an option. For still not the standard of care.
No, but that's exciting news that they've at least acknowledged that.
Yeah.
Even if it is, I think, just to cover their butts. Because, I
will say that, yeah.
I honestly, I believe that. I think, in fact, I had a discussion with Nina Teicholz about this once. So we were sitting at dinner, and I was ranting about how can these doctors not see the evidence and not at least acknowledge it. And she made a comment that sometimes it's a case where they do get it, but if they were to publicly acknowledge that, their funding that comes from big pharma and the sugar industry, and it would dry up like immediately, and they would cease to exist.
Right.
And so they kind of have to ease their way into there.
Yeah.
But at least there is some public acknowledgement that this is an option that doctors can look at. And I think that's going to lead to less of them getting cited for advising their patients about it.
Right.
And so, yeah, all steps in the right direction. And
Yeah.
I think that's the big, Dr. Adele Haidt, who's the lady who had the most to do with getting these guidelines done. And she always is very careful to point out that these are clinical guidelines for doctors by doctors, basically, as opposed to the dietary guidelines, which are the things that the government comes out with, but they are not clinical advice or the clinical guidelines in any way. They're just, at the moment, rubbish eating guidelines.
Yeah.
Which, Nina is one of the people that's working really, really hard to try and get that changed.
Mm-hmm.
But I keep saying we can't wait for that to change before we see the changes in medicine, because too many people are dying. So, just that reminds me, I heard you were on a podcast, on the Low Carb MD podcast with Brian just the other day. You were telling us, or telling him about a helicopter pilot or something with a great story.
Yeah, that's one of our profiles.
He's also part of the movie, right?
Yes, he is. Yeah. His name is Brian Gaudette. He's a captain in the U.S. Army, and he's an Apache helicopter pilot. And, for the folks that think that the dietary guidelines don't matter, we wanted to interview someone who is basically captive of the dietary guidelines, because they do set food policy for school lunch programs, for feeding programs for the elderly, for food stamp programs, and for the
military, right?
Yes, and for our rations for the military. And so he's an Apache helicopter pilot. He's on the front lines, all around the world, and he was getting sicker and sicker and sicker from eating Army food, and he finally basically lost his flight status because he developed an autoimmune disorder, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but he didn't know what was wrong. He just developed symptoms of vertigo, and he sort of had to raise his hand and say, I can't
fly anymore.
Can't fly. I can't be flying with vertigo. But he'd also gained about 30 pounds and just was lethargic and had brain fog and just had sort of this whole suite of health problems. And he went to 9 different specialists over the course of 9 months in the Army medical system. And finally, they just put their hands up and said, we can't figure out what's wrong with you. And they gave him a referral to a mental health professional.
Oh my God.
And so he felt like they were basically just telling him he was crazy. And so that launched his own personal inquiry. He's like, okay, I guess I've got to figure this out on my own. And interestingly, not one of the 9 specialists asked him about his nutrition. Not one.
Not one.
Not one. And so they had some personal friends who had a daughter who had autoimmune problems, and they recommended the ketogenic diet to him. And so he's like, okay, well, I may as well try it. You know, what else am I going to do? And he tried it, and literally within a matter of weeks, many of his symptoms resolved. Within a matter of months, he'd lost the 30 pounds that he gained. The vertigo went away. Basically, all of his health problems resolved, and his flight status was returned. I'm giving away the whole story here.
No, that's so. No, it's such an awesome story. It needs to be told.
Yeah, and he's developed it. So he did it by creating these soups, these autoimmune protocol soups. They're ketogenic soups. They're about 75% fat. They're made with grass-fed lamb and grass-fed beef, and so now he's basically kind of launched this soup company on the side as well. And so that's kind of a cool thing.
That's awesome.
He's sharing with his recipe for health. He's sharing with the world. So
yeah, well, I love the fact that this movie is focusing a lot on people, the positive side of it, and showing people what they can do and that it works, and not just the theory about why it works. You can see real live people, just like people can look at them and say, hey, that's me, and that like those patients of Brian's and this guy. So I know you've been doing this on your own dime, and since you've got your real job to do all the time, that it's really difficult to find the bandwidth to get this project finished. I know you're filming with Dr. Mark Hyman next month, because he's like the narrator and stuff for the movie as well. Yes. But there's a hell of a lot of work after that, when editing and all of that kind of thing. That would be really nice if you could hire some professional editors and that to do that stuff for you. But obviously you need funding for that. So I heard on Brian's podcast that you've arranged this tax deductible type situation for people to be able to make donations to help you with this. So you tell people about that.
Yeah, we have a great program in Boise. Our production company is based in Boise, Idaho. And there's a great organization there called the Boise Film Foundation. And they have a fiscal sponsorship program that allows people who wish to support the film to make a donation to the Boise Film Foundation. And that donation is 100% tax deductible. And then the Boise Film Foundation, they take out a very small, like 5% fee for handling the funds, and then the rest.
But most of it comes to you, right?
Most of it comes. 95% of it comes to the film. Like I told you before, we're just sort of putting all this on our credit card right now. So it alleviates the pressure from us. We are a small production company. The production timeline has been longer for this film because of that, because we have to kind of fit it in between some paying jobs, to sort of keep the lights on still. So if folks would like to help out with the post-production expenses, we would greatly appreciate any assistance they can.
Yeah, we would greatly appreciate it too. I mean, anybody, if you got a few bucks that you want to hide from the tax man, let's rather put it to some better use than paying taxes on it. So I'll put that in the show notes as well, so that people can find that.
Our website is bigfatliemovie.com, and there's a trailer on there, a little video from Dr. Hyman, some more information about the film, and that's
where they can find the page to donate as well. Like there's a
Yeah.
page on there for the sponsorships and that. I'll put a link to that in the show notes too.
Okay.
All right. That was
Yeah.
brilliant. Look forward to this movie coming out.
Thank you. Yeah, it should be done by the end of the year. We'd like to have it released in January, February timeframe, early in the year when people are making those New Year's resolutions. I think that would be good timing.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for spending the time with us, Jen.
Hey, I appreciate it, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Okay, take care.
Bye.